disruptive.
America that I fought.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. Fantastic day so far. So there's a guy by the name of Liam Cosgrove here. And he is a reporter for the Gray Zone. He's done contributions to Zero Hedge, Mrs. Institute, Mises Institute, Seeking Alpha, The Federalist, and Brownstone.org. And he's a very kind of well-known investigative journalist. He's the guy that goes out and interviews people. Well, there's a moment where Liam Cosgrove went to talk to some senators and people of Congress. And I love these moments where journalists actually go and interact with these people to catch them in the act. And one of the things that a lot of these, pro-Israel, pro-genocide supporters don't really understand is kind of the formation of how Hamas originated. It's kind of like the same reason why back in the early 2000s, we said we need to go after Al-Qaeda, we need to go after ISIS, we need to stop the Taliban, we got to stop these terrorist groups. But no one ever takes the time to actually inform us of why these terror groups exist. How exactly did a bunch of people who live in sand dunes gather together to become the most deadly terrorist group known to man that we had to send our troops over there to slaughter people? How did that came to be? No one ever has the explanation to that, surprisingly. So Liam Cosgrove goes to talk to some of the senators here, and here's what they had to say. This is from Decensored News.
So are you aware that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government were funding and propping up Hamas?
Say that again.
You lose track?
No, I didn't lose track.
I'm not sure what the funding apparatus means or is.
Shouldn't you look into this before we send billions of dollars over to Israel?
It was Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy for years to prop up Hamas.
A short history of Hamas is that the Mossad deliberately helped to facilitate their rise and even directly finance their rise in order to create a right-wing religious alternative to the PLO.
Specifically, because then there would be no negotiating a state for the Palestinians. Because no one in the international community is going to look at Hamas, this terrorist organization, and say, yeah, we recognize them. So the plan was to undermine the more secular Palestinian Authority types so that they wouldn't be in control, Hamas would be in control, and then no one would ever negotiate their state.
We have breaking news out of Israel this morning where Hamas has launched a surprise attack within Israel's borders overnight.
The day after, on October 8th, there was a big piece in the Times of Israel about this. There was a front page of Haaretz. These are big newspapers in Israel. It's mind-boggling to me that this element gets left out of the conversation in America. It's not left out of the conversation in Israel. Like, their newspapers are all talking about this.
The United States stands united in the face of the horrific.
And I always wondered why. That situation. Why is it that the Israeli papers, the Israeli publications, the ones that are actually committing the mass murder, are allowed to be so open about these terrorist groups, about Hamas, about Netanyahu, the corruption, why exactly they're doing what they're doing? They're allowed to be so open. But here in the West, we have no clue. We're not allowed to know. We'll never be allowed to know. And in fact, people that ask the questions about knowing this stuff get slammed down by saying that they're anti-Semitic, that they're terrorist sympathizers, Hamas sympathizers. They get a social media telegram from Michael Rappaport. That'd be a traumatic thing if I woke up and get an inbox ding from Michael Rappaport screaming at my face. I don't know. But it's interesting that they're allowed to say factual claims. They're allowed to actually investigate and be so open to let people know. And by the way, that's probably why the Israeli people were protesting prior to October 7th, prior to this war breaking out, which really it's a genocide because there's no defense to it. War is a two-sided thing. There are no two sides. It's an invasion. it's a complete mass slaughtering of Palestinians. But that probably might be why Israeli people were protesting prior to this, protesting for the resignation of Netanyahu. Maybe because they realized that Netanyahu, Bibi, is a war criminal, much like to the rest of the war criminals we have in the United States.
Barbaric attacks on our greatest ally in the Middle East, Israel. The brutality is unlike anything we've seen in modern times. With misinformation and the horrible pro-Hamas demonstrations across the world, the U.S. Congress must reaffirm our unwavering support for Israel. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel today and forever.
Quick question.
And again, how can they conclude that there's a disinformation campaign to the publications in Israel that are admitting to this? Are they saying that the Israelis are publishing misinformation? Are they the ones actually promoting misinformation that the rest of the world is witnessing, that the rest of the world is counteracting to the war machine efforts, to the corrupt intelligence communities that are allowing this to happen?
On Israel, are you aware of the reports that prior to October 7th and over the years, Benjamin Netanyahu was actively funding and propping up Hamas?
I've not seen that report.
You've not seen that report? This is in Haaretz, Times of Israel. Very pro-Israel outlets have criticized him for this policy.
No, I haven't seen a credible report on that.
You have not?
Yeah.
And by the way, I mean, you can find direct quotes from Benjamin Netanyahu saying this in his own words, saying that you must support Hamas. We must continue funding and supporting Hamas.
I want to read something to you. This quote: anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support the bolstering of Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. That was Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2019, supporting Hamas, because he knows that as long as Hamas remains there, he can always argue that there is no partner for peace.
You have women who were just living their lives in Israel. They were raped repeatedly, children taken out of their womb.
So now to argue for ceasefires, or now to argue for the plight of the Palestinian people, when the political group that they elected and keep in power fomented and executed a heinous terrorist attack? No, that's ridiculous.
Are you familiar with the reports that Benjamin Netanyahu over the years has been actively funding Hamas?
No, I'm not aware of the report. I do want to read the
This
report.
is in Haaretz, this is in Times of Israel, over there in Israel, pro-Israel papers.
I don't do hot takes. I want to read everything before I make a comment, because something like that is a very key thing. I'm not sure what the funding apparatus means or is. Is it aid into Gaza? Is it direct aid to Hamas? I don't know.
He's directly quoted.
I love that. I don't do hot takes. I don't do hot takes. You're a congressman who looks like he has his own podcast. You don't do hot takes. Do you not see the utter stupidity that you're blurting out? You're a politician with your own podcast show, blurting out sound bites that Palestine is raping young Israeli women and children, that they're cutting children out of the wombs. You're the ones creating hot takes. You're the ones creating these sound bites. And then because a journalist came up to you and said, hey, did you read this report? It's in the Israeli publications, which you would think if you're on the side of pro-Israel, if you're that so dead set, right into the focus point of pro-Israel and nothing else, would you not read their publications? An honest question. If you're so dead set, deadlocked onto being pro-Israel that nothing else matters in the conversation, would you not read their publications? Would you not see those reports right hand? Or maybe they saw the reports and they said, oh, screw it. That's going to counteract my narrative. That's going to counteract the war efforts. That's going to counteract all the sludge funding, the corruption, the high institutions, the lobby machine of AIPAC. That's going to ruin all of that. That's going to ruin the illusion that Israel is this innocent country if they realize that, oh shit, they're actually manufacturing the terror, which we've been doing for 20 plus years. So it's not a surprise to people that have already awakened to this, but apparently it's a surprise to them, because how is it that Dave Smith, the comedian, on Joe Rogan's podcast, can excellently define and tell you verbatim of what Netanyahu said to his cabinet members, and there's countless reports stating that, but none of the Congress people, nobody who is so utterly defendant of Israel, no one can mention this. No one has bothered to look into the reports. No one knows anything about the reports. And they look so dumbfounded when a journalist approaches them and reminds them of this.
Saying you need to support Hamas to undermine a Palestinian state. This is incorrect.
Well, the thing is, I gotta read it.
Richard Sale in the UPI, Andrew Higgins in the Wall Street Journal.
I mean, this is widely reported. Like, shouldn't you look into this before we send billions of dollars over to Israel?
Well, tell me what the report says.
And
why don't we do this? Why don't we look into those and see?
Well, that's kind of what I'm saying. Is you got to look into it before the funding.
Yeah,
that would be prudent. But I'll tell you what he says. Haaretz quotes him saying explicitly that if you want to undermine a Palestinian state, you must actively support and fund Hamas. And this is well documented that the Israeli government has sent funds to Hamas leaders, covertly for years. But this is Haaretz quoting him in a private Likud meeting, Netanyahu saying it. Like I said, Haaretz, I'm sure you know, is widely respected.
Good point.
Is it factoring in?
I don't know if you have a question for me,
but shouldn't you look into this before we send billions of dollars over to Israel?
Well, tell me what the report says. Good point.
Is it factoring in?
I don't know if you have a question for me, but...
And then I have another quote from you, and the guy...
And they're still going to keep the funding. They're still going to keep the funding. Because, again, I hate to break the news to you people. But nothing matters. None of this matters. The hostages don't matter. The scene of the crime doesn't matter. Terrorist group doesn't matter. The safety of children doesn't matter. Nobody's lives matter. No, nothing of this matters. The only thing that matters is sending the slush fund to the war machine to continue on this war so that they can capitalize off the death and disparity of others. That is dead set in stone since the dawning of the military-industrial complex. And that is why they will still continue, even after all the reports come out, even if we show them right to their faces, they will still abide to the war machine. They will still abide to Israel. Why? Because they know that they're getting blackmailed for this. They know that they have to push the war efforts, because if they don't, then they don't get to be congressmen again. They don't get to sit in the high chair of political discourse. They don't get to allow themselves to have a cushy job. They get fired out. They get beaten down. They get reports and hit jobs after them. They're getting blackmailed to allow this to happen. And when a journalist comes up and corrects the record and shows it right to their face that this is all manufactured, you're being played like a goddamn fiddle. And the guy even admits to it. Yeah, you have a good point. I'm being played like a fiddle to send money off to you to Israel to allow this to happen. They're still going to do it. They're still going to do it. Just like they're doing to Ukraine, just like they're doing with other nations that we have manufactured, we have manipulated people to send the slush fund over to kill and slaughter other people overseas while destroying ourselves within. This is when the empire is collapsing, and this is when people are supposed to rise against and destroy the evil that's collapsing the empire. This is how Rome fell in a day.
The guy who said this is currently the finance minister. Okay, this guy is one of the top members of Benjamin Netanyahu's government from the Religious Zionist Party. He says the PA is a liability and Hamas is an asset. On the international playing field, in this game of the delegitimization Think about it for a second. The PA's a liability and Hamas is an asset. It's a terrorist organization. Nobody will recognize it. Nobody will give it status at the ICC, and nobody will let them push resolutions at the UN.
Shouldn't you have read that before sending $14 billion of American taxpayer money over there?
To support Israel, our greatest ally in the region.
Yes.
The region, when they were attacked, we would always do that.
We
would always do that. Why wouldn't we support our allies?
Doesn't that factor into the equation if they were actively sending their money to Hamas?
Pause. Did Israel send $14 billion? Not likely. That's number one. Number two, you want to read these reports before we fully comment. All right?
You should read those before voting to send money.
In 2009.
Again, they're not going to change no matter what's presented in front of them. We could give them the full detailed explanation of how they're being manipulated. We can give them the whole layout of how this war started, of how this genocide came to be, how Benjamin Netanyahu is the greatest war criminal to walk the face of the earth, how he is the evil psychopath that we should be deteriorating against. Not Vladimir Putin, not China, not other nations that claim to be our adversaries, but the adversaries are really our allies because we're a bunch of monsters. We're a bunch of psychopathic Neanderthal Satanist killers over here in the West. So of course we're going to ally ourselves with simple, like-minded people in Israel and Saudi Arabia when really we should be getting away from them. We should not have any stance between these two nations. But they're going to do it anyway. They're going to do it anyway. Because like that Congress guy said, well, they're still our greatest ally. You really want to be an ally to a formation of a country that creates its own terrorist group to wipe out a civilization in order to advance its own game? Like, of course we would. Of course we would in the West because we just don't care. We never care. It's not about anything to do with people, hostages, Jewish faith. None of that matters. And if they tell you that it matters, they're using it to exploit you. They're using Judaism to exploit that measure. They're saying that Zionism, which is really the exact opposite of Judaism, Zionism is a part of Judaism, they claim. They're only using that to exploit people, to manipulate people, to allow them to get sucked into this propaganda that they become their minions in this slaughter. They don't care. They never will care, and they will never care at all about any of this. And here's just proof of it to further explain along. From the Jerusalem Post, Netanyahu, money to Hamas, part of strategy to keep Palestinians divided. That's from the Jerusalem Post. Here's Haaretz. Opinion, a brief history of Netanyahu-Hamas alliance. For 14 years. 14 years. So this is not just something that happened yesterday. 14 straight years. Netanyahu retained his power and created Hamas and funded Hamas and continues to fund Hamas in order to keep Palestine divided and to go against the liberation movement to allow Palestinians to liberate themselves. How about this? This is from Business Insider. So not even the Israeli publication, but this is a U.S. publication. So you're telling me that no congressperson, nobody in Congress, nobody pro-Israel in the House and the Senate in America and part of Canada has read this? Israel drove suitcases stuffed with cash into Gaza to keep Hamas in power. That's from the New York Times. This is Insider reporting an article from the New York Times. You're telling me that they have no idea that they've never seen this before? But as the spokespeople of Israel even point out, and this is why, again, This is such it's a deep state coalition to allow this to happen. It has nothing to do with Jewish people. It has nothing to do with the survivors of the music festival. It has nothing to do with the hostages. It has nothing to do with the children. It has nothing to do with any of this. It's a manufactured war to keep people at bay, to keep people, to keep Palestine and Israel at war, to allow the criminals to capitalize off this. So here it says, Israeli government spokesman says, war will continue even if all hostages are released. So all those people on social media, like Michael Rappaport, that continue on saying that, hey, we got to keep on this war. We got to keep bombing until the hostages are free. I hate to break the news to you. It was never about the hostages. It was never about any of the people. The innocent lives don't matter when it comes to the manufactured deep state catastrophe that comes with genocide. That's what happens. Nothing matters to them. Nothing. Except retaining their power, keeping people out of line, keeping people keeping people in the dark, and the death and disparity of others so they can capitalize off it. They just don't ever give a damn about anybody else. And you think this is for your national security, you think this is for your best interest, that your tax dollars in America are being sent to create more terrorist groups, being sent to allow this to continue on, being sent to mass murder people when we're killing ourselves inside our own country. These are the real terrorists that are controlling the nation. These are the people we should be fearing for. These are the people we should be fighting against. The people that create Hamas. The people that fund terrorist groups like Hamas. Hamas is just getting marching orders from Israel. So why are we not stopping them? Why are we not stopping the people that are purposely creating these terrorist groups that are going after people? Why are we not going after the machine? The devastating war machine that's took this entire world hostage and has mass slaughtered so many people and continues to do so. Why are we not taking this down? That is something we should be addressing.